Hello and welcome to the Newsroom with Sana. Today we're going to be taking a look at a number of important stories in the international community. The first is what is happening in Gaza, and of course since the 10th of October peace plan, there's a lot of hope as to what happens on ground and what sort of peace is implemented. But there's much that still remains to be done, and we have seen that the UN General Assembly resolution has also been accepted today, in which there has been discussions around the very important withdrawal of Israeli forces from Palestine, and this is integral in terms of what the way forward is and what earlier UN reports have also claimed is happening as part of war crimes and genocide that, according to Amnesty International, is still continuing despite the so-called ceasefire that has been put in place, of which we have seen more than 500 violations take place by Israeli forces. And so this is important in terms of what lies ahead and what needs to be done, with Pakistan's representative at the United Nations also speaking very, very clearly about how it's time to turn these words into action and to ensure that whatever it is that is being discussed is implemented in full letter and spirit for the freedom of the people of Palestine. So that's going to be our first story. Our next one is going to take a look at what has happened with regards to the progress made on the much watched negotiations between the US and Russian side. And this is, of course, integral in resolving the Ukraine-Russian conflict and at least moving things forward. But there have been mixed reports coming in with many European outlets claiming that Russia has not accepted the proposal, but the Kremlin has refused that and has said that that is not true. What statement we've been hearing from the Russian side is that there are some aspects that have been agreeable to the Russian side and others have not. And it seems that the key sticking points, particularly that of joining NATO and, of course, with regards to a more territorial expansion of Russia, is something that still remains to be discussed and to be chalked out, which doesn't seem to be the case so far. So we're going to be taking a look at what this 5-hour-long meeting actually resulted in and what are going to be the next steps forward. And lastly, we're going to be taking a look at the very important and unfortunate disasters, series of disasters, in fact, that have taken place in South and Southeast Asia as part of this year, and most recently what has happened in Sri Lanka as part of Cyclone Ditwah. We've seen that there have been millions of people that have been affected. Many have died, and there are countries such as Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and the Philippines, among others, that have been impacted by more than 16 such storms that occurred in this year alone. So we're going to be taking a look at what that means and how exactly will then the governments of these respective countries, and in the larger sense, the international community, is going to be taking a look at this climate change and the disasters that it brings. For now, we're going to be taking a look at our first story that focuses on what is happening in Gaza and what is the way forward. For that, we've been joined by Palestinian Affairs Analyst Osama Nazzal. Thank you very much, Osama, for being a part of the newsroom. I'd like your perspective on how you think the current situation is going on and whether there seems to be important forces joining hands and taking this together. Because at one point, of course, we see very important international players such as the United States moving forward with a peace plan that was welcome, and it was a good achievement forward to at least stop and halt the kind of militant forces and their actions that were taking place on ground. But on the other hand, we of course seen numerous violations still taking place, a continuation of genocide according to Amnesty International. And now we have the UN General Assembly demanding through this resolution that there needs to be a complete withdrawal of the Israeli forces. I want your perspective on, do you think that all of these efforts are working in coordination with each other and will result in what is the right of the Palestinian people to have a free and independent state?
The importance of any resolution by the United Nations or any other international body must be measured by to what extent this international body can obligate and commit Israel to that resolution. That is the main point. The United Nations, as we all know, is supportive of the Palestinian people rights, and more than 160 states, they are all members of the United States, recognizing the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination and to Palestinian independent state in the land occupied in 1967. But the question that we need to focus on is to what extent Israel is committing to these resolutions. And we saw the statement by the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, how his statements were comic and mocking the resolutions of the United Nations, because the Israelis know that the United Nations is not going to have any leverage or any power to enforce its resolutions. From a symbolic perspective and from human rights based approach perspective, such resolutions are very important because they prove once and again to the world that the Palestinians are a people who live on their own land and they are under occupation and they have the right to get rid of that occupation, to decide their future and to have their state. So yes, the resolution was issued by the United Nations, and it is one of hundreds of other resolutions that all call for the implementation of the rights of the Palestinian people. But what's happening on the ground is completely different. Israel is right now killing people in the Gaza Strip despite the ceasefire plan. And I'm speaking from the Palestinian city of Jenin in the north of the West Bank. We are living under Israeli imposed curfew now. No Palestinian citizen can even open the door or the window of their houses because of the Israeli military forces imposing this curfew for the third consecutive day, searching homes, detaining people, torturing people, doing everything bad, everything in violation of human rights. And we see nothing tangible from the international community.
Right. Mr. Osama, this is important what you've mentioned in terms of the obligatory aspect of such resolutions and the power, of course, to enforce whatever is being asked. But I want your take in terms of how you're taking a look at that situation, given the fact that this is really, really integral, of course, in terms of the binding aspect of these resolutions or, in fact, any international law. There is, of course, what we've seen violations of international laws being carried out by Israeli forces, indeed, a genocide that was also declared as per the UN report. We have ICJ's ruling against the Israeli military forces. And so it is important then to see, while we have all of these laws and we can use them to say that these are being violated, how exactly are such violations then met with a consequence? Because there is, of course, those who abide by the law, and there needs to be a system for countries to do so. But if someone doesn't do it, they just get away with it?
Yeah, we don't want to undermine the importance of these resolutions and the importance of the international law, though we know that it is not binding because it doesn't have teeth. The United Nations doesn't have teeth to implement or enforce its resolutions. But these resolutions remind the world, remind the international governments that there are the people of Palestine who have been suffering under the Israeli occupation for 76 years. And Israel, instead of thinking of how to start to end its occupation, it is entrenching its occupation, as now the Israeli military presence is in 53% of Gaza, and the Israeli bombs are still falling on all of Gaza. The Israeli forces are building more settlements, isolating the Palestinian Muslim city of Jerusalem from its Palestinian sphere, and at the same time dividing the West Bank into small cantons. The Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem are living today in Bantustans. There is no geographical integrity, there is no territorial continuity at all. And all that lies within the colonial policy that Israel is adamant on to implement. So these resolutions just may wake up the international conscience to tell Israel, look, all the international bodies say that you are an occupying colonial power. The General Assembly of the United Nations, the United Nations Security Council, the ICC, the ICJ, all these important bodies, the International Council of Human Rights, they all call for ending the Israeli occupation and for allowing the Palestinian people to have a free life free of occupation, free of genocide, free of mass murder, free of economic restrictions, and uh, like any other free people. But shall we get to the moment when the international community would tell Israel, either you stop your genocide, you end your occupation, or we are going to have actions on the ground? And we also what happened when Iraq, for example, occupied Kuwait and how the international community acted. Are we going to witness that? That is the question that we have no answer to yet.
Right, but Osama, who's going to be able to implement that and who has the influence to do so? When we talk about the power that, for example, the United States has over Israel and over the situation that, of course, has helped broker this peace deal in the first place, and then at least have this conversation moving forward in terms of what's next and how to then involve all of the other stakeholders, particularly the people of Palestine, in this discussion. But that's something that is still on the horizon and needs more input and more time and energy, and a lot that needs to be invested in for this to happen. Do you think that there is that same kind of push that was there before the 10th of October that is needed for this to happen right now? Or do you think that perhaps that has been shifted elsewhere while, in essence, the genocide continues?
Yeah, really, the main flaw is the weakness of the current international body and the international balance of power. The world is living a state of power imbalance. There is power disequilibrium as the United States has all the power and it controls the international politics, mainly when we talk about the countries of the Middle East. And we know that the relationship between the United States and the Israeli occupation is organic relationship, and it is a strategic one that won't be affected by certain position from the Israeli side from time to time, as sometimes the Israeli occupation government turns its back to the United States. But this does not affect the strategic relationship that it has with the United States. And this is due to many factors, of course, and mainly of the way the Arab and Muslim countries are handling the political situation and handling their relationship with the United States. Because we know that if the United States has interest, this interest lies with the Arab and the Muslim countries because of the trade exchange, because of the oil, because of the economic relations that connects the Arab Muslim countries with the United States. But why this economic relationship and this economic leverage that Arabs and Muslims have with the United States is not translated into politics, is not translated into political action. That is because of the current prevalent system. But if the United States changes its policy towards Palestine as a question, then we will see how the international law and how the United Nations resolutions are going to have value and to have weight, and the whole situation would be changed, especially when we talk about the demand of the Palestinian people, as the Palestinians always say that they are not asking for the moon. All that they want is to have a free life, to have, when their children go to the kindergarten or to the school, they know that these children are safe and they are not going to be exposed to violence by the Israeli occupation forces or by the Israeli armed settlers. The Palestinians accepted to have their state only on 22% of historic Palestine, and all that in line with the international resolutions and legitimacy. But what is needed is a change in the foreign policy of the United States.
Right. Thank you very much, Osama Nazzal, for being part of the newsroom and sharing your views. This is, of course, integral in terms of what will be the new way forward, and especially in terms of what is happening on ground. And the second phase that is very, very important in ensuring there is peace on the ground, the UN General Assembly resolution at least puts more force and more drive into this direction. But whether or not the real influence is going to exist in terms of its power to bind Israeli authorities to ensure that there is, in fact, a withdrawal of their troops is something that is still a question mark, and perhaps the onus of that again will fall on the large powers at play and those that have influence, such as the United States, that has been able to broker a peace deal previously and is perhaps the only country to be able to do so in the future as well. We're now going to be taking a look at what is happening with regards to the United States' power to influence the Russia-Ukraine conflict. There seems to be a lot of effort made on this front in terms of the negotiations that have taken place, and most recently, of course, the meeting of the U.S. officials with Mr. Putin in Russia. And there is, of course, a lot of discussion as to what really came of the meeting, but it seems that there is no real breakthrough that has come out of this. And so it's important to actually see and understand that there is a lot that needs to be done with regards to where this is leading. For this, we've been joined by political analyst Professor Scott Lucas. Thank you, Professor Lucas, for being part of the newsroom. I'd like your perspective on how you see what has come out of this 5-hour-long discussion. A lot of the European nations seems to be reporting that there is a refusal of acceptance of the plan that is put forward by Putin, but the Kremlin says otherwise, giving a mixed signal that there are some aspects that they've agreed to and others which still need more work to be done. What really do you think is the Russian position right now?
Well, I think the way to understand this is there's actually two proposals that are in play. The media quite often only refer to one. The initial proposal is actually a Kremlin proposal that has been developed since the spring, but it was coordinated with Donald Trump's envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, in late October. It was done so through Vladimir Putin's top economic advisor, Kirill Dmitriev, who was also in yesterday's meeting. And that proposal was more of an ultimatum to Ukraine to give up territory, including the vital Donetsk region in the east of the country, to keep itself militarily weak, to limit the assistance it could get from the West, and to its reconstruction fund. The Trump camp would get 50% of the profits from it. Meanwhile, Russia would have sanctions lifted, would go back into the G8, and would have an amnesty for war crimes. Now, that initial proposal was met by a European counter proposal, which is, look, before we discuss all these issues, territory, economics, military, we have a ceasefire on the current front lines, so Russia doesn't seize more territory. And the Europeans got space for that counter proposal because of the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who is opposed to the Witkoff-Kushner ultimatum that was fashioned with the Kremlin. So what happened yesterday is that the Kremlin were trying to get their proposal back to the top of the agenda. They had Witkoff and Kushner there for 5 hours to say, push aside the Europeans, push aside the idea of a ceasefire, get back to those priorities that we should get Donetsk and that Ukraine should not be in NATO. How successful they will be with Kushner and Witkoff, we'll see once they get back to Washington, because of course the key person to watch is which way does Donald Trump spin amidst the competition between these two proposals.
Absolutely, and that is integral, of course, in terms of how exactly will this discussion move forward. But it seems that Mr. Trump is, of course, very keen to go ahead and resolve this conflict, and this is something that he has spoken about when he was taking office as well. And so in terms of the kind of pressure that perhaps the United States administration under Mr. Trump faces in this regard, do you think that they'll be able to push Putin or Zelensky more in terms of what they're asking at the table at the moment?
No, not while you have the infighting within the administration, because let's talk about that original proposal with the Kremlin. Even though Donald Trump wants to get credit for being a peacemaker, the big leverage that the Kremlin has is the proposal for joint US-Russian economic projects. And indeed, those projects have been discussed between members of the Trump camp and the Russians going back to the spring. ExxonMobil, The U.S. oil company has been discussing it with the Russian oil company Rosneft. Two major Trump donors have been discussing projects involving a revival of the Nord Stream pipelines and a gas project. One of those two Trump donors is a close friend from university days of Donald Trump Jr. So there is money to be made here. And of course, both Witkoff and Kushner are businessmen. They are both, Witkoff in real estate. Kushner is an investment fund manager. Now, that is the attempt by the Kremlin to say to Trump, look, for the sake of business, you want to side with us. But then you have this faction inside the administration led by Marco Rubio, former senator, very close to legislators who don't want to be that close to the Kremlin. They don't want to feel like the Kremlin is leading them by the nose. The fundamental here is, though, let's be cut to the chase. The reason why we don't get a ceasefire is because Vladimir Putin doesn't want a ceasefire. He wants more territory. He wants to get rid of the Ukrainian government, and he wants sanctions lifted on Russia. The U.S., that Rubio faction, has pushed back against that with sanctions on Russia, including on Russia's oil customers. That is what has scared the Kremlin and what has scared Witkoff and Kushner. So again, in part, that meeting yesterday was to push back the pressure on Moscow to give up on its demands. So it's not a question of more U.S. pressure being applied right now. Will the U.S. maintain the pressure it currently has on Moscow to try to limit the invasion?
Right. And Professor Scott, what about the pressure that the European nations can also put in this equation? It seems that they also want to move ahead with 2 years of funding towards Ukraine, and that, of course, is going to increase the possibilities of elongating this conflict even further. And it seems the Kremlin also doesn't really want to back down. And the rhetoric he's just given before this meeting also adds more fuel to fire, saying that he doesn't want to engage in a war or with the European nations, but he's ready to do so. And at the same time, we have European countries planning an extensive funding for Ukraine. So how do you think this is going to pan out if all the sides are willing to stretch this out? Who's going to break first?
Yeah, well, I mean, the European Union does have some pressure on Russia. I mean, I think they're up to their 20th sanctions package. And significantly today, they have confirmed that they are going to completely phase out their purchases of Russian gas by the autumn of 2027. But the main EU move has been this proposal to defend Ukraine because all of Ukraine's taxes go to its military. So how do you fund?
Professor Scott, I'm unable to hear you. Stay with us, Professor Scott, and I'll come back to you. We've also been joined by Gleb Gryzlov, who's Program Coordinator, Russian International Affairs Council, to get more insight. Thank you, Gleb, for joining us. I'd like your take on what really is the Russian stance at the moment. What we're trying to understand is what is it that Kremlin is pushing for. The meeting, of course, that has happened most recently with U.S. officials and Mr. Putin hasn't really had a very clear-cut breakthrough. And so we want to have more insight in terms of what demands have been put forward by the Russian side, and where do you think there is room for negotiation?
Yeah, thanks for having me here today. Yeah, as you said, it's definitely a breakthrough. We've seen many positive moments of negotiations between the United States and Russia, and it demonstrates that Moscow is in a good position, because that Washington is ready to negotiate with Russian Federation, and it demonstrates that the situation on the battlefield, on the battleground, is getting favor for the Russian side. And I should say that these negotiations is good for the whole world community, because it's very fruitful that two sides can find a compromise and to stop this war, because it's maybe European counterparts and the Ukraine doesn't understand it right now, but it's the best chance for Ukraine to end this conflict right now. So yes, I think that's we can see a positive signs. And though parties haven't found a compromise yet, and there are still some issues that should be discussed. I think it's a breakthrough, and I think in the near future, maybe in the first half of next year, we will achieve something like ceasefire. But firstly, we should definitely the other party should be convinced that the negotiation is the only way to end this conflict. And I think that's what the United States is trying to do. Then Trump is talking about stopping the financing the Ukraine side. So I think that can work actually.
Right, Mr. Gleb, let me clarify something. What I want to understand, you spoke about the ceasefire and you mentioned that that is going to be something that is integral, but I want your take on whether or not that's something that Mr. Putin is also agreeing to move forward with, particularly in the current situation, because as far as we understand, this is a sticking point as well, because the ceasefire hasn't happened so far, as Professor Scott was also mentioning earlier, is mainly because Putin hasn't agreed to it, and there's that requirement of so many aspects to be finalized first, including joining NATO, including more territory that Russia is demanding before there is a ceasefire. Is that a possibility, in your opinion, that can change?
No, actually, when I said about ceasefire, I meant that the whole negotiation process, when it starts, the ceasefire comes with the end of the conflict. I think there shouldn't be any ceasefire until we see that the Ukrainian side is ready to go to the negotiations and ready to take these steps that are actually necessary to finish this war. I mean,
Right. So essentially, Gleb, what I understand correctly is that you're saying unless Russian demands are met, the war is going to continue, and once those demands are met, there will be ceasefire. Or once you agree to what Russia is saying on the table, then there will be ceasefire. Correct?
Correct. Yes.
All right. Let me also get into the discussion, Professor Scott. Professor Scott, I want your take on this, because essentially that means that what Russia is saying, that either you accept it or you don't, and that's the only option.
Yeah, I'm grateful for Mr. Grivkov for actually stating the Kremlin's position and putting its spin here, and you've nailed it. You and I both know that every negotiation, when you try to end conflict, begins with a ceasefire. If you don't begin with a ceasefire, you have each party trying to take more advantage by continuing attacks, which is exactly what Russia is doing on the air and on the ground. That is precisely why, contrary to the spin that Mr. Grivkov was putting on this wasn't an advance in the talks yesterday. This was the Kremlin trying to bounce Witkoff and Kushner into rejecting the European proposal for the ceasefire and to go back to the ultimatum. And again, because Mr. Grivkov didn't address the issues in that ultimatum, let's restate what we're talking about here. And that is that the Kremlin is demanding that Ukraine give up its own territory. It's not only that Russia holds the territory it occupies, about 19% of the country, but it gives up this strategic area, which not only is fortified, it opens up the highway to Kyiv. It's also the Russian demand, of course, that Ukraine's kept in a state of permanent weakness, so that Russia has at least a 4-to-1 advantage in personnel, that Russia has a vast advantage in weaponry, and therefore it could invade at any time in the future, which is possible, which makes security guarantees meaningless. And it's also the fact that Russia has been making the demands, although it's not explicitly stated in their ultimatum, that the Zelensky government has to step down. So fundamentally, what the Kremlin is saying is you have to reward our invasion. You have to reward our aggression before we will ceasefire. And the fundamental question here is, will the Kushner-Witkoff faction backed by J.D. Vance agree to it? But getting back to Europe, let me just emphasize what I was saying about Europe. The European financial support for Kyiv is not to attack Russia. The European financial support for Kyiv is to make sure it can continue to resist by funding public services over the next 2 years. And I think that is fundamental here, because when you had that threat by Vladimir Putin yesterday to go to war with Europe, if Europe wants a war, we are prepared for it. That effectively was trying to intimidate the Europeans, get them out of the negotiations, and to try to keep them from, try to get them to end their support to Ukraine. In other words, you basically leave Ukraine with no choice but to surrender. And the final point here is Russia's not actually winning at this point. I am sure Mr. Grivkov and I can have a discussion on this later, but the fact of the matter is Russia had 18% of Ukraine 2 years ago. It occupies 19% 2 years later. At the cost of more than 1.3 million casualties, it's taken 1% of Ukrainian territory in 24 months.
Right. Gleb, I'd like you to respond to that too, and add to that also why ceasefire first is not an option when you're coming to the negotiating table. And secondly, what is Russia's stance with regards to European nations? I understand what Putin said in terms of not wanting to attack Europe, but also saying that it's ready to go to war with it. And so in terms of the pressure that it adds on the current negotiation process, and then the ways in which we've seen the European stance of earlier the 19-point agenda, and then now with increased funding to Ukraine, what then will be this nexus between Europe and Russia, given the fact that the only way forward, according to the Kremlin, is to get more territory?
Sorry, this is for me. I just missed a little bit. Excuse me?
Yes, Gleb, I can hear you.
Yeah. Could you repeat, because my connection?
No problem. No problem. My question is twofold. The first is why ceasefire first is not an option when you're coming to the negotiating table. Why is it not possible for ceasefire to happen first, irrespective of whatever the stance is of the different parties involved, to go for a ceasefire and then try and chalk out a way possible? Why is that not an option for Russia? My second question is that we've seen statements coming in from Russia with regards to the stance against Europe, and we have seen that Putin has said that it's ready to go to war with Europe if that's the case. And so I want your take in terms of how exactly will that create a nexus between Europe and Russia, and what it would mean for the relationship between both these countries, given the fact that at this point it's only adding more pressure to this negotiating process, and the fact that we've seen Europe responding with its own plans and its own funding for Ukraine for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. The ceasefire is not an option for Russia because it's just gives an opportunity for Ukraine to take a break, to restore, because Russia is dominating on the battlefield, regardless of what have been said about Russia captured only 1% of the territory. It's not. It's actually partly true because the Ukraine still have these strong positions at some point and some locations in the Donetsk area, though after this fortress will be captured by Russian side, the fronts of Ukraine will collapse, and it's definitely will lead to the failure of Ukraine, to the defeat of Ukraine, and that will take some time, of course, and they will take some resources, but there is no option for Ukraine to win in this war conflict by in military ways. So why would we let Ukraine and European sides to prepare for to give them a chance to restore their positions?
But Gleb, if I understand correctly, isn't the point of the ceasefire is to cease the fire so that you can process a peace plan forward?
Yes, because the problem is that Ukrainian government wants the ceasefire right now. There's no guarantees, no other conditions created. But to have a ceasefire, you have to negotiate on something first. So it would have some points for Ukraine to continue this negotiation, not to like restore the positions and then continue the conflict. No, I think there should be some guarantees for Russian side firstly, if you want to hear my opinion on this matter. And about the Europe and so-called threats to the Europe, the important thing is here that Russia doesn't want to fight with Europe, and actually we don't. I don't think Russia has much resources to fight Europe in full-scale war. And I don't think any European country wants to fight Russia, because if they did, they let their troops to be present on the battlefield on the Ukrainian side, but they don't want to do that. They just want to. They just can spend their resources and help in with military aid, and I don't think. I can't even imagine the situation where Russia will attack the European countries. We just wanted to the Europeans to understand that this war can be won by Ukraine on the battlefield. So we would like to end it in a peaceful way, through the negotiations. Yes, or of course. Ukraine will have to give up some of its territories, because that's the main condition for Russia. So yes, the Europe doesn't understand that the Ukraine can win.
Right, absolutely. Professor Scott, I'd like your take on this too. We've spoken at length about the ceasefire, but we are free to comment on that as well if you want. But I want to understand especially this dynamic of the European nations and their support of Ukraine. How far they're going to be willing to extend this? Because, of course, this is something that we've seen Russia, of course, taking a firmer stance on. But how far is Europe also willing to take this bargain and to have this stance in support of Ukraine, given the fact that it's also, of course, adding to their own issues and their own relationship dynamics with Russia and then in the international community?
Well, they're committed to this. I think when you hear Mr. Grivkov effectively say, look, Russia, the Kremlin is not going to cease fire. I mean, that's just simply a ploy that they're going to continue to attack, and unless Kyiv surrenders, they will keep doing that. The question is posed to the Europeans, especially given the unpredictability of the Trump administration. Do you keep defending Ukraine? What we've actually seen today, only today, is that NATO has responded, which of course includes European countries, as well as countries like Canada, with $1.2 billion in commitments for the purchase of U.S. weapons to be provided to Ukraine, so Ukraine can continue to defend itself on the battlefield. And today we've seen the European Union's proposal, which you've mentioned, which is, yes, we're going to find the 150 billion euros, 90 billion euros of it, or not 135 billion euros, 90 billion from the EU, 45 billion from elsewhere, to fund the Ukraine government through 2026, 2027. And let's be clear here, Russia's already attacking Europe. Russia's actually carrying out sabotage attacks across Europe. We had a very serious attack on Polish railways just a few weeks ago. We've got Russia that's carrying out drone and fighter jet incursions into European airspace to test it. We've got Russian cyber attacks, which have been taking place, as well as Russian maritime attacks, and of course, the disinformation and propaganda operations. So the Europeans have to take this choice of, do they continue to defend themselves as well as Ukraine when they face this twin threat of the Kremlin and the unpredictability of Donald Trump? But I'll put this point. Vladimir Putin has constantly lost his gambles in this conflict. He gambled in February 2022 that no one would defend Ukraine. But when he lost that gamble, he didn't take Kyiv, and his forces were forced out of northern Ukraine. He carried out the gamble, and instead of contracting, NATO expanded, with Sweden and Finland joining it. And the European Union has actually, I think, been it's found a sense of purpose in terms of that need to defend Ukraine. What Putin's done is he's taking another gamble now. He's taking a gamble that he has people from the US administration in his pocket, and he can break Europe this time. And the fact here is that when you hear the Kremlin's propaganda, I think you realize they may lose that gamble because, you know, Mr. Grivkov referred to Pokrovsk, this town in the Donetsk region that Putin declared they finally captured yesterday, which, by the way, they haven't. They've been trying to take Pokrovsk for 17 months, a single town, and they still haven't taken it. So this dream of the Kremlin that Ukraine will collapse tomorrow and Europe will collapse with it, I think that'll be Vladimir Putin's next gamble. But given the economic difficulties inside Russia, it may be his last gamble.
Right, Gleb, I'll give you just 30 seconds. We don't have enough time, but you have a chance to respond. Please go ahead.
Yes, I don't think that I can agree with all have been said because these statements that Russia hasn't captured Pokrovsk and Volchansk and other cities that Zelensky trying to convince Europeans these statements are definitely false because Russian troops are captured these cities and Russian army is moving forward, and you can't deny this fact. It will take some time, of course, to move on, but.
But Gleb, Professor Scott disagrees. He said you haven't done that.
You haven't done it. There's still fighting going on in Pokrovsk, in the north of the city.
Yes, Gleb.
Yes. So, yeah. That's what I just wanted to say, that Europe and Ukraine won't be able to win on the battleground, however the gambles are.
Thank you very much, Gleb and Professor Scott, for joining us. Unfortunately, that's all that we have time for, but thank you so much, gentlemen, for being part of the show. And of course, it remains to be seen exactly how these negotiations are going to pan out. But the Russian stance is very, very clear in terms of the demands that they've put forward and what is required for a ceasefire to take place. But it is then now, again, the United States and the next steps that it's going to take in order to, of course, move these things forward and what exactly can be done. At least the push and the will is there to making sure there is peace on the ground, but exactly what would that look like is something that we'll have to talk about as the situation evolves. We're now going to be taking a look at our last segment that focuses on climate change and climate-induced disasters, particularly the most recent ones in South and Southeast Asia, including in countries like Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, and others, which of course have impacted millions of lives, resulting in the deaths of hundreds and affecting thousands more. This is something to, of course, be concerned about on an international scale, but it is the people of these countries and most importantly Sri Lanka that have faced such huge catastrophes, and we've seen the death tolls increase in these countries with about more than 400 killed in Sri Lanka and about more than 700 in Indonesia, and of course many others. And this is essential in terms of a very important discussion that is the need of the hour. We've been joined by Sumayya Ijaz, who's a research associate at Weather and Climate Services in Islamabad. Thank you very much, Sumayya, for being part of the newsroom. I'd like your perspective on when you see the kind of cyclones that have hit in this year alone. This is, of course, devastating and a cause of real concern as to what lies ahead. Do you think that most recently also in the COPs that we have seen or in other platforms, the discussion around climate change, the action plans that have been made are sufficient enough given the scale of the catastrophes that we're seeing?
I'm sorry, the connection got lost. Can you please repeat the question?
My question is the discussions around climate change and climate-induced disasters on platforms such as COP that you see taking place, are they sufficient to deal with the scale of the catastrophes that we're seeing, for example, right now in South and Southeast Asia?
So it's quite unfortunate that the catastrophe that we're seeing across Southeast Asia, unfortunately, so many lives have been lost. And this is, a classic case of the climate crisis, the impacts of climate change that are being realized by those nations who are the least emitters of the greenhouse gas emissions, which is the major cause of the climate crisis. And the World Meteorological Organization quotes that the current global mean temperatures have risen to 1.34 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre-industrial levels. And Asia is warming twice as fast as those global averages. So the greenhouse gas emissions that we have set out in the environment since the industrial revolutions, the highest emitters that have set out those emissions in the atmosphere are now being realized in the form of these extreme events. And unfortunately, only those communities, mostly those communities are being impacted, which are the least adapted, which are the least resilient to these because of their socioeconomic conditions and because of, the lack of adaptation. And unfortunately, this is now going into losses and damages.
Right. Sumayya, the extent to which, of course, countries like Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Philippines, Vietnam, and others are facing is a result of what other countries in the global north are, of course, emitting in the atmosphere. And so in terms of the onus that these countries and their corporations and their governments have, there's been a lot of discussion, especially by Pakistan, in terms of climate change, justice, and climate financing. How will these governments in South and Southeast Asia be equipped with dealing with such catastrophes when they're already dealing with economic pressures at home? What sort of requirements are there and that can be provided by the international community? Because so far what we've seen are only pledges and no real steps forward.
So currently, as a first response, there's always humanitarian aid that so many countries have pledged and have sent out, including Pakistan. And at the global scale, when we're talking about climate finance, so the countries the climate finance that has been pledged is around 300 million, which is like not quite up to par to the requirements of the countries. And it's mostly in the form of loans. So these countries have to pay them back. And grants are a very little share of this section of climate finance. And the consequences that have been faced and have been realized, they come into the category of a loss and damage. So they have to build back stronger. So unfortunately, because funding is really slow at the global level, so countries themselves have to take initiative, have to strengthen their communities from the bottom up. And nature-based solutions and very, minimal financing can also create a resilient solution. So, building back stronger, creating resilience of the poorest of the communities, for example, solarizing the nation and lowering their own emissions and their reliance on fossil fuels can help them build back stronger and create resilience, which is really important in this case because these extreme weather events are going to come back with greater intensities because of the impacts and because of the greenhouse gases that we have emitted now. And the impacts which are just now being realized are going to become intensified in the near future and the long-term future.
Right. Thank you very much, Sumayya Ijaz, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. You're right. There's so much that needs to be done, both in terms of domestic capabilities, whatever they may be, and then, of course, with the international community stepping in and making sure that justice prevails and those countries that are most affected are equipped and supported by the rest that are contributing far more to these catastrophes than others. That's all that we have from the newsroom today. We'll now see you tomorrow.